So we're recording this, so those of you that have any technical difficulties, or if the material moves too quickly, or you just want to review, you'll have that option. We'll be posting this on the website. The recordings in the past have been very clear, and it shows like a movie. So you'll see the slides from the PowerPoint, and you'll hear the audio, and it works very well. We'll be posting that on our website. So I'm delighted to have you all on board. This concept has been something we've been thinking about for a long time. Locally, we've done what we call lunch and learns, where we've gathered people together to do some training. This is our first international effort, so welcome everybody. Yeah, this is interesting. Move my slides.
We were getting some feedback. I'm just going to mute everyone myself, just so they know.
Sure.
I'm going to mute everyone because if we get feedback noise, then the presentation is not clear and we cannot hear the presenter. So everybody will be muted for the duration of the presentation. If you have any questions, please send them through chat. You can send the chat to me personally, Mirabella, through a private chat, or you can send it to that everyone will see. Thank you.
And so questions Mirabella will monitor the chat. We may respond to questions during the presentation, but we will certainly have time at the end. And my goal here is to begin a kind of extended dialogue. Some of you have been exposed to some of our training in the past, and so this is in addition to. Others of you are new, and so we're very interested in your input. We'll be sending you a survey to evaluate what we've done. And again, we want really honest feedback. This is our first effort with this kind of format, and we really need to know what works, what doesn't work, the content itself. My plan is to create an agenda over the next 12 months with specific guest speakers and specific topics. And it'll be, if this time works, it'll be at this time, the third Thursday of each month. That's the plan for the time being. I want to introduce Reverend David Martin. He's been a friend for decades. We've had many adventures together. We've collaborated on clinical intensives. David's been on that team for a number of years where people come to us and we work with them. He and I have traveled together and spoken collectively. He currently is a chaplain in a local hospital system. He's also a church consultant. So welcome, David. And,
great to be here.
And I'm the leader of Eden Counseling and Consulting and Eden Leaders Institute. Let's see, how's this going to work? There we go. And so some of these slides, I'm just going to put them up and you can see them, and we'll talk a little bit about them, but move through. The mission statements you can read at your leisure. It's just to introduce us to those of you that don't know us. But what we're going to do in the next 40 minutes is present information about what we perceive to be the essentials of both premarital, marital counseling and mentoring. And the website, edencounseling.com, is where we have many of the handouts we'll talk about. David will post some more from what he's talking about, and this discussion will be on that as well. One of the first things that, if you're considering starting a program, is to win people over. And so you have to have a rationale. Why should we develop mentoring? Why should we develop counseling? And so here are some facts you can look at that just talk about marriage. And in America, marriage is no longer as popular as it used to be. For the first time, we have 51% of families not led by married people in the last census. And you can see different information about sexuality and dating practices. But what I wanted to point out was that in the second to the last bullet, when I was young, Becky and I married at 22, which was normal back in the 70s. We were 22 years of age, we got married, and so we were beginning our adult life together. So it was the cornerstone of our vision for marriage. And now it's being viewed as the capstone, which is the last stone you put on a structure.
After career.
After career, getting a job, getting an education, getting a house, getting a car, having some life adventures, and then getting married. And the implications are that Christian young adults are foregoing marriage. They're putting it off, but they're not necessarily putting off sexuality. So we have complicating factors in the American culture today. There's also a pessimism about marriage in that people have gotten used to hearing that in America there's a 50% divorce rate, and therefore there's a pessimism about why invest in this at all. That fact is somewhat exaggerated in that the research takes in 1 year's time the number of registered marriages and the number of registered divorces.
It's not good statistics.
And it just needs to be understood. So 50% number of divorces per marriages, but there are really lots of marriages that go the distance.
And my oldest son is 37. He and his wife, we were just on vacations, said they do not know anyone in their sphere of influence where they live that has good marriage.
And that's a real problem because you have the blind leading the blind through life. And so one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing is we want you all as leaders to be successful personally, financially, maritally. And so the topics that we'll address will sometimes be addressed directly to leaders over the next year to help promote health and success amongst ourselves. And this whole concept of marriage mentoring, the marriage mentors benefit more than anybody. So the people that you train to do this will have improved marriages, as we'll show as we move through. So one of the arguments about why have marriage mentoring and counseling is that good marriage improves health, wealth,
life expectancy, 7 years for men, 3 years for women.
Men benefit more than women generally from marriage. We find out. But there really is greater life satisfaction and surprising to some in American culture, greater sexual satisfaction within marriage than without marriage. And of course, the opportunity to become an adult.
And now even employers are looking at productivity amongst married employees is better than it is amongst their single employees.
Oh, interesting. That's good to know. And the converse, though, that bad marriage is bad for you. Women more than men are depressed by bad marriage. Violence toward women occurs mostly in an intimate context. And then you have the issues that pertain to divorce and single parenting, which are really challenging in life. So what we want to do as marriage mentors, as leaders developing marriage programs, is to be able to promote truth. And part of the truth of life is that good things sometimes are hard. And so the value of marriage while going through difficult times and the value that God has for us in our development of character is something that has to be taught and understood and mentored. And the best stories are your stories. When we're able to share, oh, I've been through that. You know, I was going through some really tough times leading my organization. I had people say, oh, that's normal, Paul. You know, you just have to make it through. Well, that's encouraging. So people need to hear the stories of other people.
I remember when I was teaching a marriage mentoring class, and the one couple, they'd been married 20 years, but 8 years earlier, he had had an affair. And one of the things we talked about as a mentor is you share the good, the bad, and the ugly of your story. And he says, you mean actually tell them about that? Yeah. I said, tell them about that.
Right.
And that becomes a part of who you are and part of your journey. And we need to see examples of people that have been through some of the rockiest, hardest times and have still made it. You know.
David's mentioning one of the key things as you're developing mentors is to help them overcome the myth that their job is to tell people what to do. Their job is really to share of their lives, and in the process, that's what really is transformational. I tell people that are in a tough time, you're developing a good story. When you're through this, you'll have a life-transforming story that God will use to share with someone. And I found in my own life, my best stories are my worst stories. They're the ones that are life-transforming. So here's just some facts about marriage and parenting. I'm not going to go through them all. At your leisure, if this interests you, you can look through it. But there's strong argument for marriage, not cohabitation, which is now the norm in America. And but just knowing truth, so that if you look at that last bullet, 67% of couples say satisfaction drops with children, and that's very true. And so we need to be helping people anticipate when they come to the childbearing time.
Doesn't mean their marriage is over.
Well,
it
that
just gotta be more intentional.
And the problem is in America, this is a high level of incidence of adultery.
Yeah.
And so we need to be mentoring people through these times so that they're enjoying the great times of being a parent, but dealing with the diminished intimacy, diminished time, diminished energy. So just being able to speak the truth and help people anticipate so they don't feel lost is a real part of marriage mentoring.
Well, when you think of the fact also that in the year I was born, 1950, only 4% of children were born out of wedlock. Now it's 38%.
Right. And higher among certain minorities, you're telling me. Yeah.
72% amongst African Americans. Yeah.
So this is just another slide about facts. If we understand certain truths about life, we can help people anticipate and deal with it. And so these are 3 high-risk divorce scenarios: death of a child, adultery, and a gastric bypass surgery is a surgery that you use to alter your body weight, and some people don't adjust to the new identity that they have in that. So again, if we anticipate these sorts of things, we can come alongside people, we can develop people who can mentor specific high-risk issues, and we can have more successful marriages and less divorces. So as we're arguing for the value of mentoring, you know, Satan is a prowling lion seeking whom he may devour. And we live, in America at least, in a consistently growing state of isolation, with people not even going to the movies anymore. So sitting at home, dealing with just a few friends. I had a woman in a conference ask me, well, I have really strong family relationships. Isn't that enough? And I said, no, because the consensual wisdom is limited to your family. It doesn't have the breadth that the church has with you know, variety of experiences. So we really need to develop a mindset for young people that you need to stay connected, or older people, you need to stay connected. You need to have new input all the time and be sharing of yourself. That leads to health. We have a Proverbs that describes, he says, I see the fool, and he's being tempted. The seductress takes him in, and he's alone. He's isolated. He's not accountable. So, and one of the things that really argues for developing people with expertise is the culture, a mobile, transient culture, and people are looking for, they expect experts. So they're looking for someone who can help me with this, and so we need to develop this. So these slides have simply been about a rationale for why do this. And what I have here is my view of what would be really, really useful. And my own slide is blocked. Oh, here we go. I can move this. You don't see this, but there's a little thing in my way. So this may be shocking, but I would have relationship mentor training starting at 7 years of age. And the reason for that is, in America at least, our research on addictions goes to show that addictions start developing between 7 and 10, where a child is having a tough time. He begins or she finds something that alters their mood, and they're down on a path that can lead to destruction. Similarly, or specifically, pornographic exposure in America, and it's largely through television and the internet, is as young as 5 to 7 years of age, young people seeing their first images. So, and this isn't happening, what I'm describing here. This is really a new concept. So churches that are starting in high school, young adult, we need to start sooner. So that's my soapbox on when we need to start relationship training. And then a church would have pre-marriage, marriage, and parenting enrichment programs and mentors. We've developed a parenting mentor program so that young children are born into an environment where there are multi-generational people giving guidance. And this is a real vital area because with more broken homes in American culture, people don't have a model for how to parent as well.
When we were out in the West Coast in the Seattle area pastoring for 5 years, we found an older couple to be involved in our kids' lives who they had one child who died and never had grandchildren. And they were glad to be surrogate grandparents, and it really made a difference in our kids' lives.
Oh, absolutely. I've done the same thing. Becky and I do not yet have grandchildren, and we have a family that we've kind of adopted and speaking into their lives. The three soapboxes I get onto when I'm dealing with church leaders is if we can improve marriages and improve finances in families and improve parenting, we're creating an army for God.
And I really believe in the next 20 years that's going to be our most dynamic witness in our culture. Is that marriages and families that seem to be working. You know, some neighbor on your street will say, man, you guys look like you enjoy being together. What's going on?
Right.
You know,
that's good.
Yeah.
So there are financial programs. There aren't too many parenting programs that are really good, and we're growing in marriage. But those are three things I'd encourage you all to think about. You know, what do we have going to help people develop this? And phase of life programs just has to do with normative stuff. Realizing, helping people understand what happens in midlife, what happens after your children are gone, what happens in our older years. We need to be leading people to be productive all of their lives. The whole concept of retirement doing nothing really leads to death. There's a 5-year span after retirement that's high risk for death because people don't do anything meaningful.
I see it in the hospital all the time with people who end up having major health issues in those first couple of years after retirement who have been pretty healthy their whole lives.
Exactly. Whoops, I just made a boo-boo. So what this is about, let me see if is about some research. And we're not going to go into great details here, but if you want to, I'm blocking on the name, the primary researcher in Minnesota.
David Olson.
David Olson. If you want to Google him, you'll find all the stuff that I had to dig up to show these kind of stats. So this is research done with their particular program, and it shows that the mentored couples, so this is a marriage mentor program, the mentored couples' marriages improve. And that's kind of the highest value you can give volunteers is giving them an opportunity to experience success, and then they want to share that with others. So this just is data showing this progress. There was a 10-year program done in this South Hills Church in Abilene, Texas, and they had a phenomenal success in that they experienced a 99% success rate for 320 couples. So
went through their program.
So compared to the national statistics in America, this is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a direct result of having an effective parenting program for a decade. So all of this is to argue for your own thinking and for bringing others along.
And I think the one point on that statistic is saying, it was a 12% canceled marriage. That's why in the premarital program,
canceled divorces, you mean?
Yeah, divorces, yeah. But then even in the premarital programs that I've been doing in churches, I always encourage them to invite pre-engaged couples.
Mm-hmm.
When they're in the early stage, when they're not planning for a wedding, they're thinking about a marriage. And one year we had 18 couples and 4 of them broke up at the end of class. It's better then than later.
Which we consider success.
That's success.
Yeah, better a broken engagement, pre-engagement
yeah.
than a broken marriage. Yeah. Absolutely. And so, again, this slide is just arguing that if you want a good marriage, make that a focus of ministry and your marriage will improve pretty much invariably. I mean, It doesn't mean it'll be easy,
right.
but you'll develop skills and strengths. So let me shift just quickly in terms of introductory comments from helping people start a marriage to dealing with distressed couples. And restoration or recovery or rehabilitation or resurrection are terms that I use when marriage has really reached a dead point. And marriage counseling by itself is worthless. The statistical argument, David, is that only 10% of couples who get traditional marriage counseling improve. And so you might as well not do it. It really is a waste of time. We experience 90% success, and that's because people are in community. They're in
right.
churches, there are people caring for them, praying for them. And so that's why this formula of mentors representing the Christian community and counselors in distressed couples will lead to restoration. Proverbs 15:22, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. I think this applies to marriages, parenting, many advisors. We've literally seen miracles, 99% probability divorced because of the multiple issues. And even in the midst of the counseling, it often is that outside voice, the mentor, the friend saying, well, you can do this, let us come with you. That is a success. You'll see names on this slide. Zonizer is a family that invited Becky and me into their home while we were graduate students. They were strategically inviting us to join life with them for 2 years. And he mentored me incredibly, my theology, my sense of ministry. The Allmans are a couple, she's still living, he's deceased. They, in their home, on their own volition, they just started inviting young couples in. They had as many as 80 people in their house at a shot during periods of time. They've mentored hundreds of couples, just kind of spontaneously. And they are viewed by these couples as spiritual parents, really powerful impact. So as you're contemplating your own ministry, your own call, reflect on your own life. Who helped you develop to be who you are? And you'll come up with a list of people, parents, relatives, other pastors, teachers, and you'll reflect upon the need for community, this huge value that we have this with others. David speaks into my life constantly. You've heard him shoot some statistics out, and so he'll keep me up to date as to what he's been reading, and that's just really valuable. We pray for each other, we encourage each other. He's part of my cord of 3 strands from Ecclesiastes 4, people that are your lifeline. We all need that. It's really important, and it's becoming more and more rare in our culture. Hence the need to develop this stuff. So let's shift into what you might teach. A few minutes on content, and we're not going to get specific with any of these things today. I will reference a video that we'll get up real soon. It's in. We'll be posting one that was translated into Romanian, so that there's English and Romanian in the same content, and we'll post both an English and a Romanian PowerPoint, so that this can be viewed and shared. Feel free to share this with people. But all these things you see on this slide are specific exercises and content that we teach whenever I'm doing marriage mentor training or premarital counselor training or marriage counseling training and counseling itself. These skill sets are essential. You really have to empower people with the ability to communicate, manage their own emotions, solve problems, regulate deep-seated, difficult emotional kind of triggers. And so there's all this works on that. We don't do premarital counseling when people are abusive to each other, when there are unregulated addictions taking place, when there is untreated psychopathology, just because the brain can't function well. And so people need to get better before they consider merging themselves to another relationship.
2 halves don't make a whole.
2 halves make something else broken, right? Right. So these are just a list of some things that we test for whenever we're doing this. We interview and test for, and we can train in how to do simple screening, this sort of thing, so that you're not
You don't have to be a licensed psychologist to do this.
No, not to, some of this stuff is so blatant, but you do have to be able to speak into it and to be able to set limits sometimes and say, you need to do this before you do that. That's just sometimes the way we do. Let's talk a little bit about how to develop a program. I think you need to plan a year. Once you've conceptualized what you want to do, and once you've conceptualized who you want to train, then you look at 12 months, and you hopefully can get more than one couple in it, so that there's
and it's really important in your first generation to handpick those people.
Yes.
And don't ask for volunteers.
You start. Well, depending on how you go about it, you can have Group A and Group B, but your A list needs to be people that you believe have the capacity. So these are the things that you need. Mature, not necessarily old. You can be a mature 30-year-old and have great value with your peers. But if they're dealing with significant crisis and significant brokenness, they will have difficulty being objective, and so they will tend to play out their issues on other people. So they need to be either healthy or really well on the way to healing. They have to be willing to commit. They have to have the capacity to commit both to the training and to the activity itself. And then they just, these other things: wise, patient, empathic, and non-judgmental is a biblical concept. We are not to be judges of each other, and that's a mindset. You have to take people from, I'll tell people what to do and they'll be healthy, which was me in my early training. I went into counseling because I was going to tell people what to do and, be God's voice in their life, which sometimes happens, but more often than not, it's coming alongside and tolerating a certain amount of dysfunction with them while you're bringing them to wholeness. So we have to have discernment as to when to speak, when to be silent, when to be patient. And some of that you can't train, easily at least, quickly. So you look for people with these characteristics. Then you set up classes, the duration of which and the frequency can vary, but I think I've done this in full day workshops, but I think better is weekly training over 6 months. So it's mostly didactic.
It can assimilate a lot more.
Yeah, you do this over time, and we've done a thing where we've had a mix of full day training and then follow-up classes, but they have to practice. The main thing here is they have to do this stuff. Authentic leadership means that you're living this life. And so what training typically does is give people a common language, a common way to discuss it, so that when you deal with a couple, with as a leader and as a mentor, you understand each other.
And even a part of the actual training, you stop and have periods where they do practice exercises.
In the training.
In the training itself.
Yeah, a 90-minute training will typically be 20 minutes of content. A little fellowship time, and then a good 45 minutes of working on something plus questions. That's real typical as you move through teaching specific things. You'll be surprised. You have to teach people how to greet. Maybe not your first class, but by your third class, you'll be teaching people how to greet, make other people feel welcome. You'll be teaching people how to use body language. You'll be teaching people how to host, how to listen. These are some basic things that have to be reviewed in these training. And then you want to have some couples lined up so that before the year is out, people are actually doing something. And you want to have a small enough class so that everybody's doing something before the year is out. So you need to anticipate how many marriages are we looking at? Where's our pool of workers going to come from? In America, for decades, psychology has been the most popular college major. Practically speaking, you can do nothing with a psychology degree. And so people end up doing something else. I was actually asked to, in one local church, to lead a training for mentors, which I was willing to do. I told the leaders, it doesn't sound to me like you have a plan, and so nothing will happen. But I'll run your class. They had selected content, and I took them through, I think it was a 6-week program. Yeah. People were excited. They loved it. And then a few months later, how many are you mentoring? Well, we kind of forgot about that. So this having a plan that goes the course of a year, structured, and then planning to get people doing something. So the last 6 months in the classes, you're like supervising. You're like people understand that their situation is going to be discussed and processed, and you're building a collective team who also will be learning how to consult with each other rather than functioning in isolation. Christ sent them out 2 by 2. We have to do the same thing. We send out a couple with another couple, not necessarily seeing the same person, but able to discuss and work together. So those are the critical elements there. Then once you finish the first year, to have a program, you have to have periodic training, review, follow-up. And then if you have a large church, you would be running successive classes. This might become an annual kind of thing where you're training new mentors and that sort of thing. Southeast Virginia is very transient. So we'll train somebody up. They'll be with us for 2 years, then they're gone. So we have to keep working resources like that. So let's talk about mandatory. That's like, in terms of both our experience, David and I. We have several churches, Eden does, where we are their counselors. And so they meet with a pastor, a couple getting married meets with a pastor. Then they meet with us for 5 sessions. We use the Prepare test, which has a fee. Is it $40 now for online?
It's $35, I think, still.
$35. So in our culture, that's affordable. Yeah. And where we can't do that, I have methods of interview that cover some of the same ground. But they take a test. They meet with our counselors. In the first session, the test is interpreted. And then in the last 4 sessions, we always do budget, communication, and conflict management, expectations in terms of roles, family, friendships. And then there's growth areas. There are growth areas that come forward in their profession. But a minimum of 5 sessions. The couple can opt for more if they need it. And then we send a report to the pastor, and off they go. When it's a second or third marriage, they often need more. They already are carrying some baggage, and they need a little more help with that.
It's like one lady, I always say in the first session, every one of us come into marriage with junk in our trunk. Some have a trunk full, some people have a truck full. And this one woman, she was 55, remarrying after being divorced for 10 years. She said, I may have a semi.
I was going to say, you could have a Mini Cooper or you could have an SUV. David, talk about what you do. So here's a group model, a mixed model, actually.
I have a contract with a local church that I have a close relationship with the pastoral staff, and I've been doing this for about 17 years. And it's largely an African-American church, and so we do a 4-month class. We only meet once a month for 2.5 hours, and then every couple is given assignments every week so that they have to apply what's been taught in class, and then I'm in an email correspondence with them, sometimes qualifying questions and so forth. They have to let me know when they're meeting, the accountability, when they're meeting for at least 2 hours a week to specifically deal with the assignments that we've been giving them. They all take the Prepare test, and then for those of you who aren't familiar with it, you get a 24-page report back on that couple. It looks at their agreement in 10 major areas of marriage, looks at their family of origin, looks at some personality issues, which really gives you a good basis to see, is this a conflicted couple? Is this a vitalized couple? And so forth. And then they can contract with me then if they get part of my contract is do one 90-minute session, which is never enough individually. And then they can opt to meet with me further at their own expense.
So we wanted to just let you know there are different ways to go about this, but you need a plan, you need a structure, and then it becomes part of the culture of your church, and can really be extremely
Now the part that I think is going to be critical in this context is to add to it the mentoring piece. I did one mentoring training, but it didn't have the follow-up to be consistent, because for a lot of African Americans, I'll hear them say, Pastor, I understand the principle. I just don't know what it looks like. I've never seen it modeled. And the mentoring component, those who have gotten the mentoring do so much better. And there are studies that show even in marriage counseling, if you add a mentoring component, success rate exponentially goes up.
I would say that at least the churches in my circle of influence are doing much better with premarital counseling. And so here's another message I would say. Do something, even if you do it only half well is better than nothing.
Well, and I think in the marital end, a lot of times what I call it, I have a little program I do for couples called Marital Tune-Up, and I call it marital coaching.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they're not necessarily in extreme crisis,
right.
but they realize that one couple, they all of a sudden realize their last kid is leaving for college, and they've been so vested in their kids
Mm-hmm.
that they haven't been intentional
Mm-hmm.
with their marriage, and they saw that there's a potential crisis over the horizon here, and they need to deal with it.
Okay. It's good. It's good. So, in my opinion, the perfect program would have a well-integrated mandatory. Oh, one word about mandatory. We have a church. A little story. This is true. We had a church that we work with and been working with for years, and the pastor said to me, "Paul, I have an older couple. I'm not going to require premarital counseling. They're wise, they're mature," because we'd had already 10 years of doing all their couples. And I said, "That's a mistake." and 3 months later, he said, "That was a mistake. They had as much problem as everybody else. They were in their 80s." And he said, "Oh, what could they possibly need?" So anyway, mandatory.
You got 80 years of baggage.
Yeah, and people won't do it. If it's a voluntary program, they won't see the need. They won't do it. So it really has to be mandatory. One of the rationales regarding that is I've heard pastors say, "Well, if I'm going to be responsible for marrying them, I'm going to accept responsibility for really preparing them for marriage, not just the wedding."
Right.
And that I think there's a good rationale for mandatory.
And statistically, I can't remember the statistic. The number of pastors are now requiring that has quadrupled since the 1960s.
Right.
That the recognition. I mean, as an ordained minister who's done hundreds of weddings, but I feel deeply responsible when I stand before God and these witnesses bringing this couple together.
Right. So here's a point I hadn't put in here. As a pastor, I think those of you that are pastors, you have a responsibility to decide what God has called you to do to serve your community. As a counselor, I don't try to judge whether a couple should marry or not. And so when we send a report to a pastor, we do express concerns. This couple needs to work on communication or conflict management or their budget, but we don't judge. We don't try to dissuade them. So when people have left one of our counseling sequences and chosen not to marry, they've come to that conclusion. It's become evident that they are not ready to marry. And as we said earlier, we consider that success as well. So a mandatory program for premarital marriage, parenting, and then church-based mentors who have been trained and can work with both marriage preparation and distressed marriages. And then you have outside resources. This is one of my soapboxes, is that when a church invests a lot in hiring professional counselors, it's an asset that is expensive. And because a professional counselor can only really serve 20 people a week.
And sometimes people minimize what their influence can be. Well, we got a professional for that. And so we don't involve others.
That can be a risk.
And that's kind of the downside. One of the sister churches to this other church, their pastor actually requires, as a part of membership, they require you to go through Financial Peace University, Dave Ramsey's course on getting out of debt, managing your money.
That's good.
And it's transformed their church.
Right.
When they bought their church building, they paid cash. Their first group of people they ran through it, that 38 households who combined had $700,000 in unsecured debt. At the end of 3 months, they had retired $200,000 in debt.
Fabulous.
I mean, it's just fabulous stories. Right. But they actually make it a part of membership. If you want to be a member here, you got to get your financial house in order.
So when I'm talking to church leaders, I say invest in staff, develop your staff who can develop your volunteer source, which empowers people for ministry, and the impact is much greater than someone who does what we do, sits in an office and does that sort of thing. Now, you may be in a community where the only way you can bring a Christian counselor in is to hire them. That was the way it was in the 80s, back here in America. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do that entirely, but try to network if you can, if you have local resources, so that your resources are focused on developing your people within the church. So here are just some things that Eden does. And David does prepare and enrich training, right? You do that sort of thing, and you can also do it online. If you're in Romania, this is probably not practical, both from an economic standpoint, and I don't know if they have a Romanian version. So that's where we get into. I have structured interview training that you can, if you look at 4-session marriage counseling, where I assess the couple during an interview, and then I use some other short scales like the DISC and the Myers-Briggs short versions that are free online, And I think we found one in Romania, version
Like
of
a
the
Kersey.
Kiersey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So then I'm looking at personality and stuff. So there are different ways to assess. We find the Prepare Enrich very efficient for us, and for most of our people, it's cost effective. It's effective for our time as well. But there are different ways to do that. So these are some things that are available. And then I'm just going to show these slides just so that it ends up on the tape. Just some books that David and I use, and we're old, so some of these books are old, right?
Yeah, but doesn't mean they're good.
They go back a few years. And some of these books, if you go to half.com or Amazon used books, I mean, you can get them for just a couple dollars. I mean, really, really inexpensive. Any favorites on here that you?
Well, I just this past year read Tim and Kathy Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage, and it is phenomenal because 60% of their congregation are single, and this was a series he preached that still outsells everything by a long
Very
shot.
Powerful.
Because I know in my first premarital class when I said, "What do you think the purpose of marriage is?" Because my underpinning of that is, if you don't know the purpose of something, you'll exploit it. And so some of the answers you hear to make me happy, I said, you just set her up to fail you.
Right.
No,
that's good.
That's good. Because if you don't, and that's why this is so good, because it's full of sociologists, research, psychologists. He just fills it with good research behind where we are with marriage in our culture, and then making sure that we have a biblical understanding of what marriage is really about.
So I'm seeing some chat. Mirabella, can you hear us now? Go ahead and break in.
Yes, there was a part where the sound kind of broke off and it was not very clear, but it has
cleared up.
It's fixed now. And I don't know if that was just somebody else as well.
So we're recording this, so if there are gaps, and I'm recording out a separate audio thing. Well, we'll review this and make sure that it's accessible to everybody. So.
Okay.
And again, I'm a reminder, if you're having thoughts and want to just shoot us a chat, and we're just going to wrap up here in a minute and answer questions, and there's few of us enough that we'll have some open mic time today, so that'll be good. Another series of books is here, and I failed to look up a couple authors, it looks like, but you can find these books. The last several are secular books, they're not Christian authors. John Gottman is one of the world premier researchers in marriage. And all these books, I think, could be read by couples, right? As well as for leaders. So these are all useful resources. I don't know which have been translated into Romanian or which other books might be available. And this is the kind of thing that would be really helpful from you all. As we're doing these things and you see that we could add valuable content, send it to us. If you have a resource that's good, right. We want to create an ongoing dialogue. We'll post useful resources as we move along here. So we just, last night, David and I just quickly threw down some things that we thought would be useful, but you may have some really good resources to share, and we would love to see that. So, so that is our presentation. Now what we'd like to do is in fact, I'm going to close the screen out so I can see myself. How's this going to work? So can do you see David and I now, Mirabella?
Yes. Yes, we can see you.
So we don't have any questions written, so let's just field questions. And so I'm not quite sure technically how best to do this, whether we just unmic everybody or whether they can mic and unmic themselves, right, Mirabella?
Yes, that would be the best thing to do, because if everybody turns on the mic at the same time, there will be a lot of feedback, and that will make it difficult to hear. So whoever is speaking can unmute themselves, or if they don't know how to, they can write to me via the chat option, and I can unmute them.
Who's first?
Well, let me just say this. It doesn't just have to be questions. I mean, if you have had good experience and want to share a different approach, that would be awesome too. So it could be a question, or it could be a comment, or something in addition to what we're doing. We heard a ding, but I don't hear any voice.
Everybody's mics are muted, so if you want to say something,
unmute.
Well, do you
And
have to unmute them so they can unmute themselves?
no, they should be able to unmute themselves.
Okay.
But I can unmute someone if if they write to me. But I'm wondering if somebody has a question in Romanian, I could translate.
Exactly.
I could offer that. Dacă cineva are o întrebare și dorește să pună în limba română, putem să traducem întrebarea, dacă nu știți exact cum să formulați în engleză.
I want to make sure it's not just technical problems. So let me do this. Someone that I know, Liviu, can you unmute your mic for a minute? Okay.
Sure.
We can speak then. All right, good. So let me ask a question. Liviu, you're a small startup church, right?
Yes.
As you're listening to this presentation, what from a pastor's perspective are some of the challenges, just as you've been processing this?
Well, we already have a couple of young couples with us, so none of them were before going through preparation regarding their family in a very let's say in a very didactic way.
Mm-hmm.
So now, after me and my wife getting trained through the course, should we do something? I mean, probably we should. That's because this is why we are listening to you.
Yeah.
Of course, we had them read some books, and we talked to them according to what we thought it's wise and good for their years. But what steps would be necessary at this point right now? So I have no question because I have first.
Well, you've sparked some thought that I have. So that's actually a great way to start. If you find a book, a resource that you think would be useful, and you get someone else to read it, and you just talk about it, that is a great beginning. And then if you are comfortable, as you're talking about these things, you and your wife share from your own life experience, appropriate application. A big part of the kind of context you're talking about, one-on-one, and we didn't talk about this, just listening to each other's stories.
Yeah.
That's a big part of this. So you start, let's say you don't have a program, you just want to do something, you just get together and you say, tell me how you met. Tell me what your dreams are. You create some questions.
And everyone kind of shares their story. You
Right.
just kind of go around, let's say it's 4 couples, they each talk about, what's one of the funniest things that happened. Keep it light initially until you develop some relational trust, and you have more relational capital,
One of the obstacles that every couple has to overcome is their own sense of pride and shame, and the risk that it feels to be transparent. And this is true of the mentor couples as well.
Right.
I mean, we have to be comfortable with our own story so that we can share it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it often begins, as you said, lighthearted, get together, have some questions planned out. When did you meet? What is your dream for 5 years from now? What do you imagine will be the greatest joys of marriage? And then you kind of move into some potentially negative. What do you imagine the biggest challenges that you'll face? And then you could ask questions about who do you know? Who do you know?
But you have to model transparency yourself.
Absolutely. Right.
Is that, in other words, if you as a leader are willing to be transparent, then you create more of a sense of safety where they're saying, wow, if the pastor's willing to share some of the dark side of his journey,
Absolutely.
it makes a huge difference.
That's an important point. Anytime I'm training or teaching or coaching, I will share personal stories.
Yeah.
And they're often not flattering. So
No.
they're going through rough times. I've people that get to know me, I'll joke about my personality quirks and things like that. That's just a level of comfort. But if we're comfortable exposing, revealing, they will be as well. So I think it's a good start, Liviu. I mean, you start with some content. maybe you just think of some personal ways to connect them around the content, and you see where it goes from there. That's good. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments? So in the next few minutes, let me ask you this. This is the first time doing this. We presented some content. It's very much something that David and I are involved with a lot, and other topics that we could talk about in the future are. I have a small presentation called "Recovering from Marriage Disasters." We can talk about specific elements of this. This was kind of an overview. We could break it down more. We can talk about some personal things for leaders. We have a lot of content regarding leadership stress, pastoral stress, stress management. I have friends that are experts in many areas. So either using chat or just coming on live one at a time, what kind of content would be useful, do you think?
Type it or tell us.
Type it or tell us. Don't be shy. And the questions I'm asking can be ongoing. You've all been connected with email to Mirabella, and we can certainly, you can think about this. We're going to send out a survey asking these same questions. So I just wanted to give you a chance here in the moment to respond if you had something on your mind. But we will circulate a survey. We will be inviting you to communicate with us more. And I haven't set the topic for July, but we will plan it's Eastern time, 12 o'clock noon, which is 7 o'clock in Romania, 9 o'clock on the West Coast, to do this again. My inclination is to kind of stay with the marriage theme and to present on recovering from marriage disasters, which I'll define and talk about. But we're open to other content as well. So, you have any closing thoughts or comments, David?
Just start. Even if it's starting small, you start someplace. And like Paul was suggesting, even get a few couples together and kind of talk about what they see some of the needs are, within your faith community, and how can we do this together? Because if you can get a small team of 2 or 3 couples to start, it just makes, it's getting a starting place. Don't feel like you got to put a huge program together immediately. That can be overwhelming. But the important thing is to start somewhere. And then, to me, starting somewhere starts with your own marriage.
So along that line, my wife and I have been talking about doing this for a while. We're so busy, it's kind of challenging. But we have some strategic young leadership couples in their late 20s, early 30s that we plan to invite into our home, invite them to just come once to try it out, but see if they'd be willing to commit to monthly contact. And it would be probably 2.5 hours long, and we would have some refreshments of some kind. It would be in our home, probably 6 to 8 couples, and some of whom know each other, all of whom know us, and we will tell them our goal is to get together and just talk about life, and our focus is going to be the marriage of a leader, because that's right. All these people are leaders, and the format would be very informal. They'd come in, we'd have some snacks, some beverage, and then the first meeting, I typically go around the room, and I think
breaking up again.
Yes, Mirabella?
You were breaking up again. If you can repeat that last, I don't know if anybody else heard, but I couldn't hear.
Okay, I'll back up to content. So we would invite them in, have some snacks, and then we'd be sitting in a circle in our living room, which is large enough. It's tight to get that many people in, but it's cozy, and just some opening questions of very often, how did you meet? That's a real common thing to share early on. Then we may have some kind of vision questions. Many of them won't have children yet. What are your thoughts about parenting? We just throw some things out that are beginning to disclose not too intrusive the first time, whereas Becky and I will share freely of ourselves. And then we would get together the second time, and pretty soon go. These are very competent people. We'd go pretty deep pretty soon, and we would probably do a little sharing about the critical issues for leaders, as in anybody, are managing their own conflict, managing their time, managing stress, setting appropriate boundaries around their marriage and other ministry demands. So pretty soon we would be talking about things that I think would elicit in this group some very transparent, practical kinds of things. We would model not telling people what to do or making judgmental statements, but we would be inviting people to amongst each other to encourage each other with guidance. Connie just writes a session on developing a culture of healthy marriages in the small life groups. That's a great concept, Connie. We can certainly take a look at that in the future. Appreciate you sending that in. Small group development is critical, and what I find is that we consult with some pretty large churches, and they're really proud of all their small groups. I just had a meeting with a board of elders who said, we just realized that in the past 5 years, only one group has ever done a Bible study.
Yeah, they're fellowship group.
They're all having fun.
They're all having fun. Yeah,
That's the balance of relationship and content
truth,
is challenging. So that's a good topic. Thanks, Connie. So go ahead, David.
I'm sorry, I got to run. I have a patient going into surgery that I need to see, but it's been a privilege being with you folks today, and look forward to seeing you again. Have a blessed day.
All right. Well, bless you, David. He's on call and got a call a little while ago, so he's going to go do that, and that can happen to anybody who's in ministry and leadership. He's already gone, but I want to thank him for joining us, and his work is just 5 minutes from here, so he popped over and did that. And so as we wrap up, I appreciate your presence. Do let us know how we can serve. That's our primary goal, is to serve in a way that has value, and we won't know what value there is. I mean, I have some idea of what I think has value, but that may not be right, and we want to be open to dialogue and discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and draw us to a close, unless there's any other last comments that someone wants to make. Don't want to close the door too quickly. Regina asked, can we do a webinar on leaders working with couples dealing with stress and time demands? Absolutely. Thanks, Regina, for asking that question. We will add that to the list. I think we all need to review the topic of personal stress and personal boundaries and health, and so that we can lead others as well with that. So I appreciate that. Always good to hear from you, Regina. Thanks for joining us. And as we go along, I didn't know today how much time to spend introducing people, but there's some really great people in the group that are watching right now, and I appreciate you being here. We'll be tapping some of you for content in the future. I'm quite sure if you're willing to participate as we move forward. So Mirabelle is posting her email to make sure that everybody has that handy. We want to remain in dialogue. I have great intentions, but I get really busy. So that's Mirabelle is her title is communication specialist. She's the one kind of in charge of all this stuff. So feel free to CC her on almost anything you send to me, unless it's really personal and you want to keep that private. And I'm willing to have private conversations with any of you. We call them safe conversations. If any of this stirs stuff and you want to talk, happy to do that. So we're wrapping up on time. I'm going to close in prayer. Bless you all. Every time we add people to relationship, you become part of our own prayer, reaching out to the Lord, asking Him to bless you and encourage you and strengthen you. So be blessed today. So let me just close in prayer. Heavenly Father, I'm grateful for the folks that have joined us today. I pray for their ministry, for their families, their personal lives. May they each of us be challenged to be healthy in our heart and our soul, our spirit, our mind, drawing close to you and encouraging one another to love and good works. Give us the strength to do that. Help us with technical stuff. Help us to figure out how to do this well so that it is honoring to you in many, many ways. Give us guidance. Give us the kind of discerned counsel that would help us do this well, just as we need that in everything in our lives. Help us to not be ashamed to ask for help. Help us to be authentic leaders in all that we do. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So bless you all. Whatever you're about the rest of your day, may it glorify God. Take care. I'm going to sign us out of this meeting. Feel free to respond with future correspondence, phone calls, texts. Thank you so much. And some of you are posting thanks. You're all very welcome. You're very welcome. God bless.